Hey everybody, it is Friday, January 12th. You're listening to the Mo News Podcast. I'm Moshe Winunu.
And I'm Jill Wagner. This is the place where we bring you just the facts.
And we read all the news and read between the lines so you don't have to. Jill, January 12th, the internet tells me, is National Hot Tea Day. And I want to honor tea this week. Tea has been key to bringing my voice back.
On the scale of 1 to 10, I think you're now at about an 8.
Oh, from 7.5 to 8 in 24 hours? I was actually hoping I'd be closer to 9, but Jill, you're a hard judge.
We just have to be able to strive for something, right? If I gave you a 9, you'd stop with the tea for the weekend.
There's no great inflation here on the pod. Apparently, the National Tea Council made this a holiday several years ago. So for those of you who don't drink coffee or looking for a coffee break, I'm a big tea fan. I like a mint tea. Jill, what's your favorite?
I'm a big ginger tea fan.
Oh,
I love a good ginger tea. But I'm not going to lie, I am a coffee gal.
Jill, we grew up growing mint in our backyard. My dad's from Morocco originally, and mint tea is a big deal in the way they do their tea there. They literally just put the tea leaves, the mint, into a pot of boiling water, and that's how you make that delicious Moroccan mint tea. So that was a daily, if not twice a day, deal in our household growing up.
That sounds lovely. Before we get to the rest of the news, I do want to quickly mention some housekeeping here. Monday.
Are we done talking about tea? We're done talking about tea.
I guess so. I guess I put a pin on the tea.
You're like, Moshe, do you want people to listen to this podcast? Are we done? Are we done here?
I found the Morocco anecdote interesting.
Yeah. Yes.
Your voice is getting back. I think we can move on.
We have things to get to. I got you.
I did.
Moshe was about to go into the history of tea in China 5 centuries ago.
I felt we were going in that direction, so I just wanted to put a pin in it and allow us to just get to the news. Yep. Do you know the origins of tea? I felt like that's where we were going.
On this day in history. Yes.
Anyway, Monday is MLK Day. We would normally take off because it's a federal holiday, but it is also the Iowa Caucus. So we will have a podcast on Monday.
That's right, folks. Stay tuned for an exciting way to start your week or end your holiday weekend.
All right, now to the headlines. South Africa telling the UN's top court that Israel is committing genocide in Gaza as this landmark case begins. Today is day 2. And Israel will get a chance to defend itself. Voting season is about to officially get underway, and a new poll is out just days ahead of Monday's Iowa caucus. It's the economy. Inflation still stubbornly high, or at least higher than expected. What that means for potential interest rate cuts. The F.A.A. is now investigating whether Boeing's 737 MAX 9, which was involved in the Alaska air blowout, conformed to approved design. Winter came in like a lamb, but now it is roaring to life. The polar weather that is going to be hitting much of the country as soon as tonight.
Hope you don't have flight plans through Chicago today. It could be rough, folks.
Another legendary coach is leaving his job. Bill Belichick saying goodbye to the Patriots after 24 seasons and a record 6 titles. And a blast from the past, fruit stripe gum is going to be discontinued. And it is Friday. Cheers to the freaking weekend. Time for what we are watching, reading, and eating.
Get excited for Mean Girls this weekend, folks.
Stop trying to make fetch happen.
We will try again in this podcast.
All right, let's start with those hearings at the International Court of Justice, or the ICJ, over the Israeli war with Hamas. The ICJ at The Hague in the Netherlands is the highest UN legal body that can rule on issues between member states. South Africa has accused Israel of carrying out genocide against Palestinian civilians in Gaza and is demanding that the court order an emergency ceasefire of Israel's military campaign. In day 1 of the hearing, South Africa made its case in a little bit over 3 hours of arguments. They said Israel's 3-month offensive is aimed to bring, quote, the destruction of the population of Gaza. And they say Israel is intentionally murdering civilians. As part of their argument, South Africa is focusing on the devastation to civilian infrastructure, the limits that Israel has placed on aid into Gaza, as well as statements by some of Israel's leaders throughout the war, including the Israeli prime minister and defense minister, as well as some of the right-wing members of the Knesset who have said things like there are no innocent people in Gaza. The Hamas-run health ministry has said Israel has killed more than 23,000 people in Gaza, many of which are women and children. Today, though, is Israel's turn to make its argument before the court.
Yeah, you noted there, Jill, that the South Africans are focusing, among other things, on statements by Israeli leaders. A key focus, if you're trying to make the case for genocide, is to focus on intent. Now, some of these statements were made by people who don't have any role in the war, just extremist politicians. At the same time, there are statements by the defense minister, Yoav Gallant, who at one point called Hamas human animals. South Africa implied that he was talking about all Palestinians there. He has said otherwise. They also argued that Netanyahu, in a speech before troops, compared Gaza to Amalek, Amalek being the tribe in the Bible that was the enemy of the ancient Israelites. In the Bible, God commands the Israelis to wipe out Amalek. So there, the South Africans are trying to say that by invoking that, Netanyahu was implying genocide. Now, the Israelis are arguing here, and we'll get their arguments, and we'll get more of them today, that they've been trying to avoid civilian casualties, that this war is a war with Hamas, that the civilians who have been killed are collateral damage, right? They live in civilian infrastructure that the Israelis say is used by Hamas. So the Israelis have said they have no intent to murder civilians en masse, but ultimately the deaths here are just part of war. The Israelis have already said they believe this is one of the greatest shows of hypocrisy in history, this trial. The foreign ministry putting out a statement yesterday ahead of making their arguments that South Africa has utterly distorted the reality in Gaza following the October 7th massacre, ignoring the fact that it was Hamas that infiltrated Israel, murdered, executed, massacred, raped, and abducted Israeli citizens in their attempt to carry out genocide on Israel. They also point out that South African attorneys are ignoring in their arguments how Hamas uses the civilian population in Gaza as human shields. They believe that is very important context. You can imagine you'll be hearing a lot of that in court today. The fact that Hamas does use apartment buildings, mosques, schools, UN refugee camps to launch attacks on Israel. The Prime Minister, Netanyahu, in Israel also put out a video statement ahead of this trial this week, saying that Israel, specifically fighting Hamas here, has no intent to permanently occupy Gaza or permanently displace the population. The Israelis are aggressive here in their rhetoric, saying that South Africa is functioning as a legal arm of Hamas here. And they're going to say that Israel has a right to self-defense, like any other country. At the same time, the South Africans made the argument that Israel has been too aggressive in this war, hence their belief that this war, that is Israel's conduct in this war specifically, meets what they believe is the definition of genocide.
The U.S. Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, he has pretty much dismissed the case, saying, quote, "It is particularly galling, given that those who are attacking Israel, Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Houthis, as well as their supporter Iran, continue to call for the annihilation of Israel and the mass murder of Jews." It is something echoed as well by Israel's president, Isaac Herzog. So what happens next here? This court, the ICJ, has 15 judges. They are appointed for 9-year terms. They are voted on the court by the UN General Assembly and the Security Council. And then there are these 2 ad hoc judges, one from Israel and one from South Africa. But it could take literally years for a decision to be made.
Yeah, so it's a 17-judge panel here. And the judges include judges from the U.S., Australia, but also from China, Russia, Somalia, Morocco, Lebanon, notably a number of countries that are very sympathetic to the Palestinian cause, which the Israelis have made note of. And then you have the U.S., U.K., Australia, etc. on the other side. So we'll see what comes of this. These judges serve 9-year terms. So depending on how long this takes, some of these judges could be gone as soon as next month. They're finishing, a few of them are leaving on their 9-year terms. And if this takes a few years, the judges who hear this case today might not be the ultimate group that has a ruling on this. Given how long this will take, what the South Africans are looking for here is a provisional ruling. Basically, they're hoping that the court will rule that there should be an immediate ceasefire here. They're arguing that the devastation in northern Gaza, the devastation to civilian infrastructure, etc., again, they believe that is their definition of genocide here, and they want the court to act quickly. Now, keep in mind, there is no enforcement mechanism for the International Court of Justice. They can rule whatever, and then it's up to the countries to abide by this. Now, keep in mind, Hamas doesn't have to abide by the ICJ. They're a terror group. They're not privy to the ICJ or any of these agreements, but Israel is. One of the issues that the court's going to face here is that the legal question about genocide is murky. Genocide is not very specifically defined, nor is its scope. Now, it got this very general legal description in 1948 out of World War II and the Holocaust, genocide being an act committed with intent to destroy, in whole or in part, a national, ethnic, racial, or religious group. Historically, this has been hard to prove because, again, the definition is vague here. There's no clear threshold on determining what is war and civilian casualties versus genocide specifically, or the threshold for proving intent, nor a general sense of what the scope has to be genocide. Does there have to be a certain number of people killed for it to be defined as a genocide versus just war? In fact, the Israelis have argued here, but this case is not before the court, that Hamas, which in its charter says that all Jews should be killed, was in fact committing genocide themselves when it committed the terror attack on October 7th. Now, again, Hamas not on trial here. South Africa brought the case against Israel. And again, Hamas not bound by international law or ICJ rulings. And so that'll be the deal here. South Africa, by the way, is backed up by the support of dozens of countries, including all of the 50-plus Islamic and Arab countries as well. And then you have the Israelis here who are backed up by the Americans, UK, and a number of European countries who don't believe what we've seen over the course of the past 3 months meets the definition of genocide.
Most like all things related to this conflict, to Israel and Palestine, tons of emotion here. But I thought the analysis that you posted on Instagram from The Economist was pretty interesting, which argued that South Africa seems to be embracing the Palestinian cause for one reason, as a distraction from its own domestic problems. The South African president's approval ratings are way down. The economy is stalled. There have been these rolling blackouts. So analysts say that this war between Israel and Hamas comes at an opportune time. They also point out that it is ironic that a week before South Africa took Israel to court, accusing it of genocide, South Africa hosted Mohammed Hamdan Dagalo, a Sudanese warlord whose Janjaweed militia and its successor are actually accused of genocide and war crimes in Darfur.
Yeah, the Janjaweed accused of killing more than 500,000 people, raping millions of women in Darfur. So the accusation here is that South Africans are engaged in a bit of hypocrisy here. Also, they've embraced Hamas in recent years. A Hamas leader actually marched with Mandela's grandson recently in a commemoration this fall. The foreign minister of South Africa held a call with the Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh, recently also visited Iran and met with the Iranian leader. So this does come as good politics for the South African president. The ANC is dipping in popularity at the lowest level in decades right now, as they're dealing with a lot of issues in the country. So they decided to use this cause to boost their polling. And in fact, it looks like it's worked in the past couple of months in South Africa. But at the same time, Jill, Israeli analysts say that, arguments aside, this shows an Israeli diplomatic failure of the past 3 months, post-October 7th, that it's gotten to the point where this is being heard at The Hague. It's an indictment of the Netanyahu government and their relationships, or lack thereof, with certain governments around the world. And that even though a ruling here will not be binding, any ruling that asserts that genocide is being committed here, especially based on some of the rhetoric they've seen, if not the actions, will not be great for Israel's image abroad and its relationships with certain countries. Keep in mind, Jill, as part of the arguments here, notably, South Africans are also using TikTok videos made by individual soldiers who are part of that campaign in Gaza. So they're trying to make a case here based on rhetoric and individual examples that genocide is happening, even if the numbers don't pan out with, sort of historic genocides when we're talking about Rwanda, the Armenian genocide, the Holocaust, etc.
All right, now moving on to some American politics. There is now 1 weekend of campaigning left before the Iowa caucus. Yesterday, we reported on Chris Christie dropping out of the race. And now we've got some new poll numbers without Christie in the race in Iowa. So Trump is at 54%, Haley at 22%, DeSantis at 13%, and Ramaswamy, remember him, he is at 6%.
But what about Asa Hutchinson, Jill? He's still in the race.
When Christie was in the race, he had about 2% of the vote. And it looks like Haley did pick up those 2 percentage points, but still she is trailing Trump by more than 30 points.
Yeah, notable here, that 50% figure. Trump has more than 50% of Iowa Republicans in the latest poll, with 3 days to go until the caucuses. And the headline for me coming out of that poll is lights out DeSantis. He can't afford a third place finish in the state if this poll holds up. He put it all out there on the field, literally visiting all 99 counties in Iowa. He saw this as his opportunity to make a point that he's the true conservative here. He's the next generation Trump. That was his big bet here. And he spent a lot of money, $60 million plus dollars, trying to make that case. And so if he actually ends up in third place here, it's sort of over for Ron. But we'll see what happens. There's still a certain percentage of voters in Iowa who are undecided. Also keep in mind, it's going to be like -20, -30 wind chill on Monday. So we'll see who actually turns out versus people who are taking a poll from the warmth of their homes. Who's the most passionate to get out there, regardless of how cold things are, even by Iowa standards? Now, Haley's second place finish does give her a little bit of momentum going into New Hampshire. That's where she's really competitive with Trump. They vote 8 days after Iowa on January 23rd. And if she can pull off a win in New Hampshire and get a bit closer to Trump in Iowa, she has a bit of a story to tell there to Republican voters as the alternative to Trump. Now, a reminder that Iowa is not a great predictor here, but it does show you where the base of the Republican Party is. Trump has gained traction, not lost traction, despite the indictments. I would say even because of the indictments, he's gained traction in the last 6 months as people rallied around him. Among the arguments DeSantis and Haley have made is that, we love Trump, everyone loves Trump, but he can't win in a general. America doesn't love him anymore. Well, in recent weeks, we now see polls showing him beating Biden in swing states. So that argument has been thrown out the window here. So Iowa Republicans are like, well, why should I vote for the new thing if the old thing is still winning? Why should I try Coke 2, DeSantis, when I like the original Coke? And so that has made things particularly difficult for DeSantis because on policy issues, he's very close to Trump. So the race we thought we would have, Ron versus Don, it appears it'll be Nikki versus Don. The big question I think a lot of us are asking, though, is where does Nikki go versus Don? We know Don has the base of the party and continues to remain popular. If she can pull off second place in Iowa, okay. She can win in New Hampshire, great. South Carolina, her home state. She's getting crushed by Trump there. It's really Trump territory, despite the fact that she's from there. Where does she go from there? What is the case that she can make to win for a long haul fight against Trump here? And so that'll be one of the questions political analysts will be asking. In the meantime, though, it'll be really interesting to see for the first time how accurate these polls are in Iowa. That'll give us a sense of where polling is also after we've had some questions about it in recent elections.
And Moshe, I do want to quickly mention that on Wednesday, right after Christie had dropped out of the race, there was kind of this split screen because you had a CNN Iowa debate between Nikki Haley and Ron DeSantis. It was their first and only kind of one-on-one debate. They spent 2 hours launching their harshest attacks at each other and not really at Donald Trump, which was kind of Chris Christie's point when he dropped out. Trump skipped the debate per usual, and he went on Fox for a town hall. And to your point, he really seemed to already be setting his sights on the general election battle against Joe Biden.
Yeah, he's like, I've already killed Ron DeSantis. I'm going to, kill Nikki Haley. Not literally. That's a whole separate conversation because his lawyers in court this week were actually arguing that as president, he has immunity from even killing people, which I got into on the Instagram account if you want to read up on that argument. Separately, he, he's beat them. He never took them seriously. His strategy of ignoring them for the most part and skipping the debates appears to have worked so far, though, again, it's still early. And so he's focused on Biden here. He's feeling good. You could sense his confidence on Wednesday night. And so And it comes as he's taking Iowa very seriously this time around, much more than 2016, when he had no organization at all. He knows the state now. He's got county captains, etc. So we'll see how that impacts the numbers on Monday.
Okay, time now for the speed read. Let's start with the biggest economic story that we're watching in 2023 and again in 2024, inflation. So this from CNBC. Prices that consumers pay for a variety of goods and services rose more than expected in December, according to the Labor Department. The Consumer Price Index increased 0.3% for the month, higher than the estimate, at a time when most economists and policymakers see inflationary pressures easing. For the year, inflation was up 3.4%. Much of that increase came to rising housing costs. On a yearly basis, housing costs increased 6.2%, or about 2/3 of the rise in inflation. Fed officials largely expect that housing costs will decline through the year as some renewed leases reflect lower rents. Food prices increased 0.2% in December, the same as in November. Egg prices jumped almost 9% on the month, but we are still down about 24% on the year. Energy was up about 0.5% after sliding in November as gas prices actually jumped slightly. Natural gas prices declined about 0.5 percentage points. Airline fares increased 1% for the month. And Moshe, the bottom line here, not only does this impact how much things cost, as we have mentioned, prices are not going down. They're just not going up quite as quickly, but it can have a big impact on whether the Federal Reserve decides to raise or cut interest rates.
Yeah, they're trying to get inflation back under 2%. That's the healthy amount that they see price increases being at. It's still sort of being stubborn in the 3% range right now. And so the Fed wants it to be in a place where they can cut rates again. That's the expectation of the markets. That's the expectation of the Fed this year. But if inflation sort of continues to remain stubborn there, the Fed might be reluctant to lower interest rates and put a whole bunch of cash back in the market again. In particular, a lot of focus, as you mentioned, is on housing prices, on shelter prices, on rent and mortgages, etc. And so, that's a significant part of people's budgets. And so, as those prices remain stubborn, that's something they're particularly watching over at the Fed. Separately, unemployment is holding below 4%. So that's good news for the job market. Jill, as we look ahead to the economic year, we have a new podcast out over on the Premium Podcast with Farnoosh Torabi. She has a new book out. She's a financial journalist and podcast host herself. She has a book called A Healthy State of Panic. And we talk specifically about people's fear of money and finances and how to create better financial goals for yourself in that podcast. And so that's all part of being part of the Mo News Premium membership over at mo.news/premium, just $7 a month to get access to that extra podcast, as well as our members-only Instagram feed.
From the New York Times, the FAA on Thursday said that it opened an investigation into whether Boeing failed to ensure that its 737 MAX 9 plane was safe and manufactured to match the design that was approved by the agency. The FAA said the investigation stemmed from that loss of a fuselage panel of a Boeing 737 MAX 9 operated by Alaska Airlines shortly after it took off on Friday, leaving a hole in the side of the passenger cabin. The plane, as we know, returned to Portland for an emergency landing. The agency said this incident should never have happened and it cannot happen again. In a letter to Boeing dated January 10th, the FAA said that after the Portland incident, it was notified of additional issues with other Boeing 737 MAX 9 planes. The letter didn't detail what the other issues were, but we do know Alaska and United, which operate most of the MAX 9s that are in use in the United States, they said on Monday that they had discovered loose hardware on the panel when conducting preliminary inspections on their planes. This new investigation is the latest setback for Boeing, which is one of just two suppliers of large planes for most airlines, and the only one in the United States. Airbus, of course, is over in Europe.
Yeah, you got Embraer, you got Airbus, and you got Boeing. There's a lot of consolidation through the decades, and what that has meant is that there's a lack of options here. And in some cases, people have argued that it also changed the culture at Boeing, the merger with McDonnell Douglas years ago. The challenge for Boeing here, Jill, which we should note, they once had the motto, if it ain't Boeing, we're not going, which sort of is the reverse in recent years based on some of the issues, is that this is not the first issue they faced, right? Especially with the MAX plane. We've talked about it on the podcast. There were those two crashes related to the 737 MAX 8 in Indonesia and Ethiopia in recent years that led to a 2-year grounding of those planes until they could figure out the software glitch. This issue appears to be separate. The National Transportation Safety Board here in the U.S. is investigating why the 737 MAX 9 panel, known as the door plug, this was sort of a fill-in door that is sometimes an emergency door, but in the case of this plane was a door plug, flew off the Boeing jet. Whether bolts were there incorrectly, were not there at all, installation instructions, are they properly being done at Boeing? The luck here is that no one was seriously hurt in the incident, but it happened at 16,000 feet. If it was at a higher altitude when they turned off the seatbelt sign, the consequences here could have been very severe, as people literally could have been sucked out of the plane. Also lucky here, this row, the two seats closest to the door plug were not full as this incident happened. So there's the Boeing issue here, but also expect to hear more about Spirit in the coming weeks. I'm not talking about the airline, I'm talking about the manufacturer. It's Spirit Aerosystems, not Spirit Airlines. They're not related. Spirit Aerosystems is the manufacturer of the door plug. They said on Wednesday they're supporting the investigation here. But some new court documents reveal that investors in Spirit Aerosystems have long had issues with the quality of its products. The company was subject to a federal class action lawsuit filed in New York in May, alleging a history of, quote, constant quality failures. Spirit Aerosystems is one of the main suppliers to Boeing, and one of its primary roles is in manufacturing the majority of fuselages for what else? The Boeing 737 aircraft. So there's going to be an investigation of Boeing here. Expect to hear more about Spirit Aerosystems as they get to the bottom of this. So far, Jill, United and Alaska have canceled flights that were supposed to happen on their 737 MAX 9s into early next week. But I wouldn't hold out hope that those planes are taking off anytime soon as this investigation continues.
From Fox Weather, winter weather alerts are in effect from the plains to the Midwest ahead of another major winter storm, which could blast cities like Chicago and Milwaukee with heavy snow and strong winds. The storm system will move into the Chicago and Milwaukee areas today and could produce snowfall rates exceeding 1 inch per hour and wind gusts over 40 miles per hour. Significant flight delays and cancellations are anticipated at airports like O'Hare and around Wisconsin and Iowa. Many cities in Wisconsin could see snowfall totals higher than a foot, and some could approach nearly 2 feet of snow.
Yeah, basically, if you live north of I-80, which goes across sort of central Illinois there through the Midwest, watch out today. But wait, as they say in the infomercials, there's more. After this storm, temperatures will plunge across the western U.S., the Midwest, the upper plains. You could be seeing between 20 to 30 degrees below zero as soon as tonight, early tomorrow morning. You're probably already waking up to that in Montana and Wyoming. The northern plains, Iowa, Nebraska, Minnesota, Illinois, Missouri, you will be seeing that. It could be -10, -15 where you are. 7 states are already under a wind chill warning through the start of the new week, next week. Some wind chills, by the way, at night could see 65 degrees below zero. And this has really been a winter of whiplash so far. As you were noting in the headlines, Jill, it got off like a lamb. Not much snowfall, unseasonably warm temperatures, and that has reversed itself. Just last week, only 20% of the country was covered in snow. This week, it's more than doubled. 45% of the country now has some semblance of snow. And as far as that polar plunge across the middle of the country, you probably are not going to see warmer temps in places like Minneapolis, Kansas City, Little Rock, Nashville, Chicago until Thursday into Friday.
Okay, from the New York Times, remember when we told you Monday that there was an apparent deal to avert a government shutdown? Well, as we say in Brooklyn, forget about it. Speaker Mike Johnson coming under mounting pressure from House GOP hardliners to renege on the spending deal that he had struck with Democrats over the weekend for avoiding the government shutdown. Ultra conservatives demanding that he put forward a new plan with deeper budget cuts. After meeting privately in his office in the Capitol with Republicans irate about the spending agreement, Johnson said that he was discussing their demand to walk away from that bipartisan agreement. Far-right Republicans made it clear that they considered the deal that the speaker negotiated to be a non-starter. and threatened to wreak havoc in the House if he did not advance a different one. They are pressing for deep spending cuts, and many have said that they cannot vote for any government funding measure that fails to include a severe crackdown on immigration. And right about now, Johnson is wondering why he decided to run for speaker.
Yeah, now he's like, well, I understand what Kevin McCarthy went through, because this is basically what Kevin McCarthy went through that led him to lose his job. Every time they try to make a deal, this far-right group is like, no, you can cut more, and we actually don't care if you shut down the government. We don't care about the electoral ramifications. We came to do one thing, and it's cut spending. Now, notably, this deal that Johnson shook on with Schumer, who leads the Democrats in the Senate, where they have the majority, keeps funding levels at last year's level as opposed to increasing them. This was the deal Democrats, Biden, Republicans struck last spring. It's a deal McCarthy tried to follow through on. And far-right Republicans are like, nope, we don't like this deal. And we're gonna help you get it across the finish line, because now Johnson has about a 2-seat majority. He can only lose 2 votes in the House. And this group is at about a dozen plus Republicans. So he now faces the same issue McCarthy faced. Johnson's only 3 months into his speakership. He has to go back to Schumer being like, I know we have a deal, but like, I got a problem. Well, Democrats say, tough. We're going to proceed with this deal. We made a deal here. And if not, we'll do a continuing resolution, which is the congressional term for let's keep funding levels where they are while we try to figure this out. The issue for Republicans, the far-right Republicans won't even want to do a continuing resolution. They're like, no. We want what we want, and we want it now. And we don't care if you keep the government open. By the way, when we talk about government shutdown, I've gotten notes from all of you. We're talking about, majority of government workers furloughed. That means the IRS ain't doing their job. It means the national parks are closed. It means federal museums are closed. It means a lot of the work of the government is not getting done. Passport renewals, et cetera, et cetera. And of course, has an impact on our military and defense establishment in non-urgent roles. So that's where things stand. And we'll tell you more about it next week as we listen to the latest episode of As Congress Turns.
Like sands through the hourglass, Moshe. These are the days of our lives. It's a line that honestly...
a different soap opera, Jill. As the World Turns, I believe it was on CBS. Days of Our Lives was an NBC soap opera.
It is because I was in the Page program, and it was there was a clip of it that used to play in every video that we showed everybody who would come for a tour of the NBC studios. So it's like, it's definitely in my head. Yes, so it is definitely an NBC show. Okay, moving on from ESPN, Bill Belichick, the New England Patriots coach, leaving the team after 24 seasons and a record 6 Super Bowl titles. He said Thursday, quote, "We are going to move on," while also looking back fondly at his unmatched run in NFL history that, again, included those 6 Super Bowl wins. During a news conference on Thursday, the Patriots owner Robert Kraft called Belichick the greatest coach of all time who deserved to be a first ballot Hall of Famer. Belichick, not known to show emotion, but he did get a bit choked up looking back at his time with the team. Take a listen.
And finally, to the fans, the fans here are amazing. There's so many memories of the fans, the send-offs, the parades, the Sundays, whatever the situations are, the letters of support.
Okay, so Belichick had 1 year remaining on his contract, and he will be allowed to leave the team without the Patriots seeking compensation. Apparently, this was all amicable.
Yeah, and Belichick wants to continue coaching. There's an opening in Atlanta, so he might go to the Falcons. We'll see what happens there. Kraft said he didn't want to trade Belichick. He wanted to respectfully, let him do his own thing, similar to what he did with Tom Brady, who was Belichick's quarterback for years. Jill, notably, Belichick took the team to all these championships. It was while Brady was QB. He's had a couple really tough seasons in New England and hasn't won a playoff game since Brady went to the Tampa Bay Bucks and then, of course, subsequently retired as well. So now the Patriots will be looking at a new coach. Some are saying it might be the linebackers coach, Jared Mayo. We'll see what happens there. And of course, Jill, not typically talking about football coaches on this pod, but 2 coaches in 2 days. Of course, the legendary coach at Alabama, Nick Saban, retired yesterday, and Bill Belichick, really synonymous with the Patriots, with his hoodie, with the cutoff sleeves. We've been watching him on the sideline for more than 2 decades. retiring as well this week.
And finally from CNN, another end of an era, this time for Fruit Stripe.
The Bill Belichick of gum. Yes.
It is the decades-old gum brand that was known for its fruit-inspired flavors and zebra print product. The brand's owner is discontinuing the striped treat, saying the decision to sunset this product was not taken lightly. We considered many factors before coming to the decision, including consumer preference and purchasing patterns and overall brand trends for Fruit Stripe gum. Basically saying nobody was buying it anymore.
Jill, let me tell you, I haven't bought it in decades. Well, mainly because I'm an adult now, but most significantly, did any of those pieces of gum ever last you like more than 12 seconds?
No, but I feel like gum in general, particularly gum that's like sugar gum and not sugar-free gum, pretty much lasts 15 seconds and then it's done.
I feel like Fruit Stripe gum was the worst offender. Sort of like, I have issue with certain candies, as we've discussed in this podcast. But in this case, Fruit Stripe gum, you get it as a kid, you put it in your mouth. It tastes so good for like a hot second. And then like you can't even get a minute out of it. Anyway, R.I.P. Fruit Stripe. They had the 5 flavors in the package, right? Orange, peach, cherry, melon, lemon. It also came with a temporary tattoo of the zebra mascot. By the way, the manufacturer of this makes pixie sticks and nerds. I'm learning more about the candy industry through this story, Jill. But it's not off the shelves yet. Head to your local 7-Eleven or grocery store. It might still be there. And it might last you. You'll get 10 more seconds of enjoyment per piece before it goes away forever.
Okay, it is Friday. Cheers to the freaking weekend. Time for what we are watching, reading, and eating. Moshe, kick it off.
Jill, 2 words. Mean Girls. It's back and in theaters. And I've heard good things so far.
So, Moshe, this is not a sequel, right? This is just kind of like a remake of the original.
Yes, that's my understanding.
Which makes me feel extra old because to me, Mean Girls didn't come out that long ago.
Jill, can you believe this? It came out 20 years ago, 2004.
I still don't feel like that's so long ago. But I get it. Like the kids are now the moms. I understand. I understand the way aging works.
All right. Well, let's both watch it and recap it on this pod. Jill, what are you watching?
I'm going to try to watch Killers of the Flower Moon. It won a Golden Globe for actor Lily Gladstone. It's with Leonardo DiCaprio and Robert De Niro. It's going to be out.
Right, it's a Scorsese film, right?
That's right. It's going to be out on Apple TV Plus this week, and I am looking forward to it. All right, Moshe, what are you reading?
Joel, as I mentioned earlier, we have a premium pod with Farnoosh Torabi. Her book, just finished it, Healthy State of Panic, about following your fears, embracing your fears to success professionally and financially. And so we'll link to that in the show notes. What are you reading?
So Moshe, my daughter is learning to read. She's in kindergarten. So I don't know if you and Alex are familiar yet with the children's book author Mo Willems. He's amazing. Maybe you are.
No.
Because he doesn't really write board books, which is what you're probably reading right now to Olivia. He writes for a little bit older, like 3 to 7.
Yeah, we're at 4 months right now. Actually, 4 months today. I'm still like trying to get her to like, look in the direction of the book.
Correct. Exactly. But anyway, most parents are probably familiar with these books. They're incredible. Many of them follow Piggy and Gerald. They're 2 of these characters. And what we have been doing, because my daughter is now kind of learning to read with sight words and also sounding things out. So she'll take Piggy and I'll be Gerald. And it's really exciting to be able to read with her instead of just read to her and just see her sounding out words, remembering some of her sight words, and just kind of like understanding the flow of reading a word and who says what. So that is what we have been doing at bedtime, and it is a ton of fun.
All right, what are you eating this weekend?
All right, so it is a long weekend to mark the MLK holiday, and I've got some families staying over. I think we were going to make some s'mores for the kids and adults while we're at it. What about you?
Delish. Jill, I haven't had Indian food in a long time. It's my wife, Alex's favorite food. Actually, she requested it as she was in labor delivering Olivia. I was like, what do you want to be your first meal? And she was like, Indian food. She's obsessed with Indian food. I definitely like it. I'm not as obsessed as my wife, but we had it this week. And the butter chicken and saag paneer really hit the spot, I should say.
Well, I am totally with Alex. I am a huge fan of Indian food. So enjoy. And everybody else, enjoy whatever it is that you are up to on this long weekend. Thank you for listening to the Mo News Podcast. If you like what you hear, share this with your friends. It will help us grow. Follow us and subscribe so you don't miss an episode. And give us a review, preferably a good one, in the App Store.
Yeah, no, only reviews in the App Store if you have good things to say.
Yeah, if you don't like this, just
but
let
if
it go.
you got to this point in the podcast, you like us. At least enough to give us a review. Anyway, thank you guys. That matters. Your support matters. We appreciate all of you. Stay warm out there in the Midwest. Drive safely. And we'll see you back here on Iowa Caucus Day, Monday.
All right. Bye, everybody.